just preparing the stream. Give me 1 second. Okay,
Just
so you're gonna leave the stream.
Okay, we good? Okay, let's get started. My name is my name is Stephen Blank. I'm the editor and publisher of Blank Slate Media, and I would like to welcome everyone to our sit down with Nadia Holubnyczyj, the Democratic candidate for the county legislature's 8th district. Ms. Holubnyczyj is opposed by Republican John Jeffrey for the seat that has been held for a number of years by Vincent Muscarella. It incorporates Franklin Square, Floral Park, Belrose Terrace, West Hempstead, and portions of Elmont, New Hyde Park, and Stewart Manor. We are joined in our in this sit down by Brandon Duffy, a reporter for Blank Slate. This interview is part of a series of sit downs we are holding with candidates for town and county positions during the 2021 election. So I'd like to also, before we get started, thank our regular sponsor, Northwell Health. And with that, I'd like to get underway and start with Nadia. Why are you running for county legislature?
I'm running because I actually want to give back more to the community. Over the past 20 years, I've been an advocate. I live in Floral Park, and my advocacy started out small, if you will, within the confines of Floral Park, and has built up in momentum over the years. With that, resources are limited as a private citizen. And running for legislator, and with the goal, of course, becoming legislator, with more resources available, I want to be able to pump in those resources that I believe have been untapped for a number of years, and give back to the community as best as I can, so that everyone lives the best life possible.
Okay. Have you had experience in elective office or running for office?
I did run for village trustee 2 years ago. It was the first uncontested, it was the first contested election in 10 years. And although I didn't win, I did garner 45% of the vote. So to me, that was a win. And it showed that people are ready for change. And we just needed to give a little extra push. And I also served as president of the local PTA. I served 6 years as a civic president. We have 4 civics in the village. I did serve 6 years as civic president, at which point we brought up membership. We had over nearly 150 members paid, which was a very large amount. And I started to bring back the sense of community in the village for our section of the village. So this would be obviously my first win, but I'm not completely unfamiliar with running for office or holding an office.
Okay. What do you believe are the let me just say, in terms of, are there any other qualifications or things that you think that would make you an effective legislator?
So through these 20 years, I've made lots of connections, important connections, with the school districts, with civic organizations, with chambers of commerce, and with local officials from county all the way up to federal. And I think all of that is an important foundation for any person holding an elected office, so that you can reach as much potential as possible for your district. And that to me is an important piece, to be able to move up and down that scale and have those resources available and someone to reach out to, multiple channels to reach out to when you're trying to create something good for your community.
Okay. What do you believe are the major issues in the legislature, and particularly in the 8th district?
I believe the major issue is residents now feel that their voice is not heard. That's part of the reason why I also ran for trustee, is residents were repeatedly telling me that, oh, what's the point? No one listens. They're going to do what they're going to do. And it was extremely frustrating, particularly more so at such a local level when access to government is literally right at your fingertips. Your elected officials are a phone call away, an email away, or they're going to show up at the next community event if they do show up. And I was finding repeatedly that people, just roll their eyes when you say, well, what about your local official? You get that reaction. And I refuse to accept that. That's probably one of the reasons why I also got involved 20 years ago, is because it is so readily accessible. And this is where change can happen, and happen effectively and quickly. It's not bureaucratic, junk, at the federal level with layers and layers and layers upon government. We are direct access. And so now running for county legislator, same thing. Now I'm door knocking beyond the borders of Floral Park. And for District 8, it's still the same reaction. It's, oh, they don't listen. Oh, they don't listen. Oh, what's the point? They're going to do what they want to do.
What are people telling you that needs to be done? What are what are you hearing that they want to do? And what is your response? What do you think needs to be the response to the problem?
So they want more connection with their local government. They want that access to their legislature.
Do they want it for any purpose? Is there, crime or bad roads or
no? Isn't roads are always an issue. I think that's just like a written in permanent marker for now. I know that there's been tremendous support for Laura Curran as I go door to door. Everyone does seem satisfied. Again, Nassau County was rated safest county by U.S. World and U.S. News. Sorry. So they're comfortable with regards to that. The issues are coming out of the pandemic, unemployment, small businesses are being lost. And those are the issues that are being brought to my attention. Well, not even to my attention, because as involved as I am in the community, I was aware of this as well. And they're just echoing the same thing. But it's more the empathetic, apathetic response to local government that they feel is there, and they want a more responsive representative.
This is a particularly important election.
I'm sorry?
This is a particularly important election because it's also this will be the legislature that gets elected is going to reset the district lines based on the 2020 census.
Right.
Now, Kavan Abraham, the Democratic minority leader, has said that he would like to see a nonpartisan redistricting.
Right.
In the past, it's been handled, basically the legislative majority has been able to determine what that breakdown. where do you stand? Should there be, and this is important because redistricting can determine who is going to win elections for the next 10 years.
Right.
Because if
Right.
you can, by playing with the numbers and figuring out how to put in registered Democrats or registered Republicans, I can pretty well guarantee in most cases who is going to be the winning party in a district. So do you think that redistricting is the answer? A nonpartisan redistricting is the answer?
I think it is a fair answer. I do. You know, when you look at the map, or even just listening to the areas that I represent, you know, you even said portions of, you know, and then you look at other districts, they're even more gerrymandered than, you know, District 8. But it doesn't make sense to have this map that goes in such a zigzag. It's almost like a maze, because it's not a fair representation of the areas and their needs. You know, just like, again, as a for instance, Floral Park is broken up into 4 civic associations. And, you know, each civic is, you know, pretty defined. It's not like all squiggly, because this particular area has unique needs, as does then the north side of Jericho Turnpike. They have different needs than the west end of Floral Park. And that's the same thing with the legislature. You know, so to have it, you know, drawn out in all these crazy patterns, you know, it is clear what is happening. And it's extremely unfair. So I do favor a nonpartisan redistricting.
I mean, would you like to see if that doesn't happen, because the Republicans have basically said no, or
Right.
in the past. We haven't heard this year in a response. We did a session with Devon Abrahams recently, and he said he had yet to get a response. And this was a year ago that he raised the question of nonpartisan. But what should be the basis? Should it be geographic? Right now, Democrats hold, according to the census, an advantage of about 100,000 registered voters over Republicans, about 400 some odd and 300. And now we have, in terms of minority, the census showed that more than 40% of the population is minority. Do we look at geography? Do we look at registered voters? Do we look at
well, if you look at registered voters, then you're creating a partisanship redistricting, right? To me, you know, and I'm not going to lie, I need to be more educated on this aspect. But right now, I think it should be based on geographics, because again, each section of Nassau County has different needs. You know, those that are on a coastline versus those, you know, on the western end. You know, the needs are different. So, but if you draw it along, you know, the party line, or based on registration, then you're creating, again, partisanship.
Probably the biggest issue, the most contentious issue, had been reassessment. Laura Kern, when she came into office, it had been 8 years, basically the entire Mangano administration, where there was no reassessment, and there was this big imbalance taking place. Basically, those who challenged their assessment saw their taxes go down, and those who didn't ended up picking up an additional share of the tax burden. How do you believe what Laura Curran has done in terms of reassessment? How would you evaluate that?
I think it's a plan that's working. It's a plan in progress, and the reality is she took on something that pretty much everyone else just was afraid to even go near. And that is something that I do hear. I've heard a couple of times, not too much, from voters as I go door knocking is, the tax assessment, but then they go, but I get it. And they understand that it's not something that's going to be fixed like that. It's going to take time. This is what happened when Mangano froze the tax assessment. It was creating such a disparity. And, and Newsday, did that extensive investigation that was showing such a disparity between the affluent homes that were religiously grieving their taxes and getting it down, and those that were not saw their taxes go up exponentially because they had to make up for that loss. And the differences the gap became wider and wider. And finally, Laura Kern came in and said, enough, that this is just not fair and we need to fix it. And it's not going to happen overnight. But in the end, there is that light at the end of the rainbow where, I don't know if it's a rainbow right now, but, over the course of time, if your property taxes have gone up, you are going to be, it's going to be measured out. It's not one big lump sum. And then at the end of that time frame, you will have another assessment, with the hope, of course, that then the playing field becomes more level across the board. And those grievance companies really have just made a ton of money off of all of this. So the idea to me that it's upon the homeowner to correct the errors of a government agency is ridiculous. This should be something that's inherent, and we shouldn't have to be, crossing every, TI and, or T or whatever. We shouldn't have to be doing the work that they should be doing correctly. And Laura Kern is working to fix it.
Let me ask you this, because what Laura Kern did is she did, well, number one, did you think that it was adequately, do you think that the corrections, that the reassessment was handled well? Because Republicans have raised questions and issues with, with houses and certain people not paying. Are you satisfied with what the reassessment came up with?
I am comfortable knowing that whatever corrections need to be made will be made. And I'm not going to pretend that I am, a CPA or a tax advisor or in any way related to that. And also know that I'm not privy to a lot of information. I'm a private citizen. So there's stuff, again, that, I'll need to be educated on. But what I do know for certain is that if there is something that needs to be corrected in an effort to fix the whole system, Laura Kern and that administration will certainly make it more equitable.
Did you, just one other question on this. There was, over 8 years, we had people that were half, maybe a little less than half, were overpaying taxes, and another half that were underpaying taxes.
Right.
The changes, though, were the decision was made to wait for phase it in over 5 years.
Right.
Do you think that's a fair way of doing it, where people who have been overpaying will then be still overpaying for the next 5 years, but by lesser amounts? In the same way for the people that were underpaying, they'll be still underpaying for the next 5 years, except by lesser amounts.
Right. Well, I think it creates less of a sticker shock, because, I actually don't even know of any other alternative that's been contemplated. So you have that. So if it's not that, then what? What is an alternate solution?
The answer would be, you now put what people pay what they're supposed to pay.
Yeah, and to me that, finances are tight. We all have to do what we can to help each other. And if this makes the burden easier for some, then that's the way it needs to be done. I think it's a fairer way to do it.
Okay. COVID relief. There was there's a couple of proposals. Laura Kern has proposed giving people who qualify a check for $375 using COVID relief funds.
And that was tabled yesterday.
Right, and Republicans are calling for lifting fees that they had imposed several years ago.
I was at that meeting yesterday.
Okay. What's your feeling on what's the right way of using that money to stimulate the economy?
Well, it's interesting because I was at that meeting yesterday, and it was very heated. Laura is trying to provide relief to almost like a huge majority of residents of Nassau County. I do understand that the GOP is saying, oh, it's peanuts. It's not a drop in the bucket, and I can't fathom that idea. $375 goes a long way for a lot of people. When she wanted this to go through, it was right at the start of back to school. Back to school supplies are tremendous burden. That's why there's a lot of backpack drives, right, by our state assembly members or state leaders and local leaders, because school supplies are a tremendous burden to go back to. Because on top of that, you're also supplying the school with these everyday items. It's not just supplying your child. $375 does buy at maybe a week's worth or more of groceries. It can provide for gas for your car for well over a few months. So it's not peanuts. And I think that the fact that this hasn't been passed is a real disservice to our community that needs every cent that they can right now. With regards to the fees, this was fees that were put into place by the majority many years ago. And now all of a sudden they're like, oh, let's get rid of it because, we need to help our neighbors. And the argument last night was like, well, why are you doing it now? It's very suspect that you're doing it just before election time. But the more interesting aspect was they could not provide an answer for the hole that's going to be created when these fees are taken away. And there is absolutely no way that any legislator who has good government in their mantra could approve the rescinding of these fees without an answer on the other side. And they could not or would not provide an answer yesterday.
Well, if they lower the fees, then that's recurring. The $375 is a one-time shot. The fees are recurring. The county, this year, the finances under the Relief Act has been a windfall for the county, and it has been used for a variety of purposes. Before the release came, this year's budget was basically bailed out by NIFA. And Nassau County has been under state supervision, and they
why were they under state supervision?
Because they nearly went bankrupt in the year 2000, and they needed money from the state and the condition of that the state gave is pay back the money, and while you do that, we're going to put you under supervision. NIFA, the head of NIFA, said this year, after they refinanced some bonds using their better bond rating score, they said that Nassau still hadn't come up with a plan, that this was short term and Nassau's finances were still shaky. What's your feeling on how the county is handling the finances? NIFA is saying that were it not for them refinancing some bonds, that this year, before the bailout or the relief funds, the county would have had financial difficulty. Is the county really still not managing its finances?
Oh, I don't believe that. I don't believe that at all. Certainly, any monies received helped any municipality. And so, to say, well, what if, is kind of, I don't want to say a moot point, but the point is, we are now in a fiscally sound place, and we need to capitalize on that so that we can continue to grow and do better. So that's the best I could do for you, because to say what if, I can't. I'm not in that government. Again, I was not privy to a lot of that information prior. So I can only look forward.
Okay. Are there any things that you would see in the finances that you would like to change? And with the county, do you have any ideas about that?
I would love to, as a general rule, I need to see more finances pumped into services for the disabled. I would love to see public transportation grow for the disabled, become more reliable for the disabled, better. The service is shaky. The parameters, for going to different locales is very limited. I would love to see more robust services for the disabled.
Okay. The county recently, and this was led by Democrat.
I'm going to interrupt for a second. So when I also say the disabled, though, that also includes seniors and our veterans, because, or even those that ultimately might have a temporary disability. So it's not just the disabled. When I say for the disabled, it's a more inclusive demographic than just those with a physical, a diagnosis. I'm sorry, but go ahead.
Okay, I appreciate it. There was recently legislation proposed by Josh Lafazan, who is an independent who caucuses with the Democrats, and it was supported by several other Democrats, co-sponsored by several other Democrats.
Who also then rescinded.
Well, one of them did. Arnold Drucker was one of the members. Carol Ellen Birnbaum and Delia Dorigi-Whitten were the co-sponsors, and it would have made police a protected class and allowed them, in terms of hate crimes and things like that, and that if they were harassed or otherwise verbally abused, that they could sue people. They could sue protesters. It was seen by some, that was supported by Republicans, but what did you think of that? That Democrats that took a position that would have granted police a special classification in Nassau County.
Right. So I am physically disabled and I fall under protected class, right? I sit in a wheelchair all day, every day. I get out of bed, right into my wheelchair. I get in the car, I go back into my wheelchair. I can never escape that identity. And in fact, my husband always jokes that I could never commit a crime anyway because it's a dead giveaway. So, and to think that a police officer who can take off their uniform and put on plain clothes, look, that's what undercover cops do, right? They go undercover so that they can then mingle in a crowd. You don't know that they're a police officer at that point. So they can shed that identity. A person of color cannot shed their identity. I cannot shed my identity. And to then say that they are a protected class is, I don't agree with that. That being said, and I've told the police unions this, the same thing, and I have a friend who's a sergeant. I cannot fathom, and I totally respect the idea that these men and women put their lives on the line every single day for strangers. Now, we might do that for our loved one, but they do it for people that they don't even know. They go into situations without knowing the circumstances and are willing to risk their lives. And to me, I can't even imagine doing such a thing. I literally say a quick prayer every time I see a traffic stop because that individual does not know what they're getting into and it can turn on a dime. However, as a protected class, I don't think that that is a fair thing to do. Police officers have many layers. There are very strict laws about violence against police officers. I absolutely do not condone it. I do not condone violence against anyone, but more so for our police department because they are putting their lives at risk. But the Lafazan bill had a lot of questionable content that was also going to set up constitutional questions. So a lot of litigation, etc. So I think that bill, maybe there was a motive there, and I get that we want to do the best that we can for our police officers and protect them, but to consider them a protected class, knowing that they can shed their identities, it doesn't belong there.
One of the big issues are businesses, local businesses from the pandemic. There's a lot of downtowns. There's one in Floral Park. It's across.
Yeah.
It's one of the things that make up neighborhoods and create a sense of community. But a lot of the businesses have really taken a beating during COVID-19. And it was tough even before in some of these business districts due to online buying and issues like that. What do you think should be done in terms of, do you have ideas in terms of what can be done to support local businesses and the downtown district?
Right. So yeah, Floral Park does have a lovely little downtown. I would love actually to see it receive some upgrades, cosmetic upgrades, to make it even better. And during the pandemic, that was one of the things. Now, I knew my family was safe at home and that I needed to do something. And during that time, I, myself and this other young woman opened up a chapter of what's called Frontline Foods. And Frontline Foods is part of World Central Kitchen. And the aim was to raise local funding. And we opened up the Nassau County chapter. There were chapters all across the United States. And we opened up the Nassau County chapters because we knew that local businesses, and in this particular case, local restaurants, were suffering tremendously from the pandemic. And we didn't want to see our local businesses die. And we wanted to help. And we raised community funds. We raised actually $26,000. And with that money, we paid local restaurants who showed us economic hardship during the pandemic by laying off workers, by shortening hours. Of course, they couldn't have in-person dining. And we paid them to provide free meals to our frontline workers. And then we shifted to food insecure families. So we were helping multiple aspects during this pandemic, with, the thrust being the local restaurants. And repeatedly, we were told by these restaurants, thank you, I was able to bring back X number of employees. So helping local businesses is something that I do hold dear. They're our neighbors. During the summer, last summer, actually a year ago this week, I think it was, 11 businesses on Covert Avenue suffered tremendous fire damage, and they were decimated right during the pandemic. And with the community's input, I raised $23,000 that we then channeled back into these businesses just to give them a boost. Again, because they're our neighbors. And
but that's being a good neighbor, and certainly should be encouraged. But if you're a county legislator, there is money that has been distributed. The county has distributed money to local businesses. They've had programs for people to appeal to. One of the things, let me give you as an idea that has been mentioned, and this is by planners and architects and developers, transit-oriented mixed-use development is one of the big ideas, providing additional housing, maybe some additional, where you have retail on the bottom floor, and you have, and then you have apartments above. One of the big complaints is that in most places, you have to go in and you have to make an appeal. There's not large areas that are zoned for that.
Right, you have to get a variance. And
discourages developers, because when you need to get a variance, that adds expense to your project. And in a lot of areas, anyone that does development knows you get resident opposition almost regardless of what the type of project it is. People will have objections. Would you support seeing a type of effort to rezone areas that would permit that, so that developers would just be able to come in as a right and go ahead and build that?
I think that transit-oriented development needs to be done strategically. I think that there does need to be strong community input in these decisions. Look, the reality is during the pandemic, you had a lot of people moving from the city in stacked housing into Long Island. There was a huge boom because why? They wanted to spread out. They wanted to move away from the tight confines. And where do you find that? In Long Island. Now, if we're going to continue to develop and end up looking like a Manhattan or Astoria or anything like that, then we're going to lose those people. I think certainly near a train station like Floral Park, where that's exactly what we already have. We have the retail space on the bottom, we have apartments on top, and then we've actually had, there was a reconstructed project. Actually, it was an entire catering hall, and it was rezoned for a restaurant on the bottom with units on top, and directly across the street are all new units right by the train station. Can't get any easier than that. Certainly for the younger generation who want to just hop on a train, head into city for work, and come home. It's awesome. When you have this, you also recirculate. You bring the local economy, you boost it, because then people stay where, if everything they have is right where they live, they're going to stay. But you cannot sacrifice the urban feel of Long Island either. So to say a blanket rezoning, I'm not 100% keen on that. I would hate to think that a developer is just going to come and knock down a row of houses that are right by the train station to build stacked housing. I think, like I said, it needs to be strategic. I think it needs a lot of community input, planning, because when you also have community input and planning, you get better buy-in. But if you come in and you bulldoze, you're going to lose it, and you're not going to get the support that you want.
Right. In terms of the other part, and this ties in, particularly in Floral Park, the third track was the source of a lot of controversy.
Yeah.
That's now mostly done. A lot of the grade crossings, which were part of this, were eliminated. And it has, how do you think that the MTA and Governor Cuomo did in terms of executing it? Let's set aside the idea of it, but in terms of how was that handled?
We're glad that it's nearly done. There was looking in from the outside. Again, I was not part of the administration. I don't know what conversations were had, but as a private citizen, what I was seeing was a lot of miscommunication or lack of communication from the MTA, from somewhere between the MTA, the village, and the residents. Something was missing, and I don't know where it was coming from. But there were residents repeatedly complaining about not knowing about this project, not knowing about that project, or, total disrespect for property. And then, of course, from something that you may or may not be aware of, when the third track project was proposed, they said from Floral Park to Hicksville. And I got excited, as many residents did, thinking Floral Park's going to get a new train station. It's over 50, 60 years old, at least since it saw its last upgrade of any sort. And finally, we're going to get this done. But then I slowly came to the realization that they were starting just east of the train station. And I mean, literally like a block east of the train station. And so when I started to investigate, I even had ADA lawyers in Washington look at the proposal. It was very deftly written that it was just starting east so that they wouldn't have to do any station improvements. And that station is not wheelchair accessible. It is an elevated train station for 40 steps up to the elevated platform. And there are 3 tracks that go through this station. So I couldn't sit still. And I started to contact my local elected leaders, and ultimately speaking, I even spoke with Philip Eng. I spoke with, yep. And actually I even attended one of your forums, and I spoke at all the public hearings, and I kept pushing for elevators because I did not understand how you do a $3 billion project and that starts at our train station and not even consider an upgrade of any sort. And in March or April, we had a ribbon cutting for 3 elevators at Floral Park, ultimately. But that was like two years worth of pushing. So the fact that a lot of this, there was a lot of politics going on behind the scenes, I believe. And it's done. Whether or not I believe it was needed, no. I would have rather have seen track improvements first to see how that goes, because then the pandemic comes, and now how's that working out? we don't have ridership anywhere where it used to be. So it is what it is. It's done. I think that community benefits could have been negotiated a little bit better, again, from the outside. But here we are, but we do have 3 elevators at the Floral Park train station. So yay.
Okay. In terms of COVID,
yep.
A lot of this is coming from the state or the school boards. Is there anything that you would like to see for the county, for instance? In New York City, Mayor de Blasio said everybody has to be vaccinated or have proof. Schools, vaccination required. Where do you stand on things like requiring people like teachers and police to be vaccinated and healthcare workers from being vaccinated?
So I really can't understand when people are getting upset by this mandate, because how many of us have that permanent mark on our arm from a vaccine that was, I don't even know what it's for anymore. I mean, my kids got it.
I think it's smallpox.
Okay. But we all have that mark, and nobody could enter school. Even to this day, you have to have a certain required vaccination status to enter a school. And so to me, this is exactly the same thing. I don't understand the argument of you can't tell me. And again, being disabled, I'm a speech language pathologist by background. I work with many medically fragile children and adults who are compromised. And to know that there is potentially a healthcare worker or a teacher who's not vaccinated, who's going to be face to face with a compromised individual, is really not ensuring that everyone is safe. And I guess for me, it's part of a bigger problem of having empathy and compassion for your fellow neighbor, or the people that you take care of. Like, I don't understand it. And you can choose not to be vaccinated, but then perhaps, then I don't want my child attending the school, or I don't want you there when my child is attending the school. I just saw on the news yesterday, there's a child out on Long Island who's immunocompromised, and, she's not getting remote services the way she's supposed to be. So, so you have to have the child in school because they're not going to be educated properly in remote learning. So it's just like there's a lot of unrest, but the thrust of it is we've already had mandated vaccination. This is not anything different. Millions of people have already been vaccinated. We do see that there are little side effects, permanent, the statistics show that it's a safe vaccination, and it has to be done. We have to do it for each other. That's it.
Okay. So let me, let me ask you, Brandon, have I missed anything?
We've covered a lot.
I don't believe so, Steve. Like she said, you both have covered a lot.
Okay, so let me give you your final shot at this,
okay.
Nadia, which is why should voters vote for you rather than your opponent in this race for the 8th District County Legislature?
So, in terms of why me versus my opponent, I honestly cannot tell you because I know nothing about my opponent. I've never met him. I've never even seen him at events. So I can't say me versus him. I don't know what his platform is. So all I can talk about, and all I would rather talk about anyway, is why you should vote for me. And that's because I am truly passionate about my community. I'm sincere in that I want to do everything that I can. I've been trying to do the best that I can as a private citizen. You know, I always want to give back. I always want my neighbors to do the best that they can. It breaks my heart when I see someone suffering, when I see someone struggling, when it's not necessary, when there are resources available at the local level, at a civic level, at a local government level, and that those resources are not being channeled properly or not being channeled at all. And I want to, as you know, that's one thing that when elected, my office will be that resource. And I will help my neighbors the best that I can. I will give back what I can. I will ensure that they have all the information that they need, all the help that they need. There's untapped funds that have not been put back into the community. I want all those funds back into the community for projects that maybe a municipality has identified. Maybe one municipality wants a dog park. There are funds that can be used for that. And I think voting for me will alleviate that apathetic attitude, because I want people to be engaged in the local government. That's what drew me in, the ability to have access to local government and make a change. And so I want my neighbors to know that when I'm in that office, you will have that from me, and I will give that, and I want that back from them. I will be going into the communities on a regular basis. I will be speaking with civics. I will be speaking with chambers. I will go anywhere and everywhere. The other aspect I want to focus on is, which the pandemic has proven, is that virtual services are here, and they need to be used and they need to be built upon. One thing I did notice during the pandemic is that the current legislator was nowhere to be found. At the lowest point in our history, when we need the most support, he was nowhere to be found. And I know that if that were me, I would have been in the community safely, even if it's virtually, and I would have been in connection with my community. So I want voters to know that I've got their back, and that I am there and I will be there for them. And I think I've proven it as a private citizen. So to me, it's just a carryover now as an elected official with more resources.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I'd like to thank Ms. Holubnyczyj for taking the time and as well as those who attended or are going to be attending when they see this. I'd like to thank Northwell again for sponsoring today's discussion and others. And for those who weren't here, which we had this as an odd time and didn't do much announcing, a recording of this discussion can be found on Blank Slate Media's website, theislandnow.com, on our Facebook page, and on our YouTube channel. You'll be able to go to the YouTube channel directly or by clicking on a link on the Island Now. A story about this interview will appear in several, I guess not the 6, your district doesn't incorporate everything, in the applicable Blank Slate Media newspapers. If you are not already, we hope you will support local journalism by subscribing to the newspaper of your community. You can do so by going to our website, The Island Now. And I want to again thank our guests for taking the time, and for Brandon Duffy for participating and making sure that the recording and everything else went smoothly. and look forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks.